at a point that I couldn't have imagined when I first started writing to the Chronicle and Echo looking for work experience, that one day I could be running PA. But, you know, it's possible. If I can do it, anybody can do it. Well, it's been quite a journey. Over 43 years, I began on my local paper in Northampton. Always wanted to be a journalist, sent loads of articles to the paper, and eventually got work experience and a job there. And I guess from there, I've never really planned massively ahead. It's all been about working as hard as I can, giving it my all, and just opportunities come along over time. I've learned over time that, you know, you get some lucky breaks, you get some breaks from people that you get to know, you get breaks from sometimes doing sideways moves into different jobs, and you get loads of pushbacks along the way. But I guess over time you get hardened to those, you kind of bounce back, and some lucky breaks come along. But I think the luck comes if you're really dedicated to the job, and you're always the one who people can see is trying the hardest, giving their best, and is really focused on what they're doing. And I guess if I look across all the places I've worked, that's kind of the picture. I decided to leave Northampton, as anybody in their right mind would, and I went to London for a not particularly impressive job, working in CFAX, which is an old teletext service that some people remember. Worked as a down table sub there in an attic at Television Centre, never went anywhere. It was pretty dull. But because I was in London, I met a friend who said there's a job going at a sports agency, and I went, got a job there. But I wouldn't have known about that if I hadn't have made the jump sideways to London. That company eventually got taken over by PA, and, you know, they then opened up a teletext service, and I got the senior job running that because of the year I'd done back at CFAX. So that was kind of good fortune, I guess. I then applied to the BBC to work on their CFAX service as the editor. So I went back as the editor of a service where I'd been a down table sub 4 or 5 years before. And then good fortune comes in. The BBC News website was about to launch. It decided it would merge that with CFAX. So I joined the kind of internet bandwagon, if you like, just after the news website launched. I think established myself as somebody who could do that well. The BBC then decided they wanted a sports website, asked me if I'd do that. And that kind of rolled along for several years at the BBC. I decided I'd probably had enough at the BBC and decided to do I wouldn't say it was a sideways move, but it was a bit of a chance to work at MSN, the Microsoft website in the UK. Worked okay for 2 or 3 years, but then their whole remit changed and my kind of editorial vision didn't fit with them anymore. But while that was kind of going on, PA got in touch with me, and I got to know the Press Association from working at Microsoft, and we were customers of theirs, and their managing director got in touch and said, you know, we can tell you're not particularly happy at Microsoft now that they're changing their plans. Do you want to put your hat in the ring for the editor-in-chief's job? So again, that's about people that I'd got to know, and I got that role 10 years ago, and I've just concluded working there in the last couple of months. So there's a kind of a story all the way through there, I think, of people, you know, a bit of good fortune, plenty of pushbacks along the way. I mean, I applied for jobs at the BBC and the Press Association many times, and didn't get a reply sometimes, or didn't get the job. So I think you just have to stay focused, keep doing your best, and opportunities do come along. But you know, you get a few bruises along the way. Oh, yeah. I can show you the scars as well if you like. But I mean, well, I mean, if I just look back over the 10 years at PA, I mean, some of the biggest things in modern history have happened in those 10 years. The Queen died, Queen Elizabeth II died. We had COVID, we had Brexit. and we had some appalling terror attacks in 2017, and numerous general elections. So all of those bring their different pressures. I mean, COVID was an extraordinary time for all newsrooms, but for PA, almost overnight we had to shut our main newsroom in London, send everybody home, and maintain a news service that hopefully nobody would know that actually I was sitting in the lounge at home. The main news editor was actually sitting in a field in a converted shepherd's hut in South Wales, but nobody would have known that. We just managed to keep going, which was an extraordinary feat actually, to maintain morale, to be sending reporters out into the streets, when they know that they're in more danger than everybody who's been left at home, having reporters, photographers, video journalists doing that every day, and maintaining a very strong output when we were running it all from home. There were no news editors sitting together. All the planning was being done remotely, and to maintain that, to keep morale up and to keep the quality of the content up and the volume of content up at a time when things were so restricted, was an extraordinary feat for all the journalists who were involved. And I'll never forget that. I mean, clearly it was a desperate unfolding story. Everybody had their own personal experiences of the grimness of it, whether it was people that they were losing or people who were ill. So you had all of that to contend with, at the same time ensuring that we were still delivering a quality service every day for a story that was unfolding on a daily basis. So that was an extraordinary time, I would say. The terror attacks of 2017, I mean, you never forget those kind of moments when word comes into a newsroom that something might be happening, but you're not quite sure what, and those kind of 10-15 minutes where your specialists are ringing up their sources to try and find out what's happening. Is it just another false alarm, or is it the full-blown event? And when you realize it is, deciding at what point you start writing about it, what you're going to say has definitely happened, what you're not sure about, what you won't report until you're more sure, and also sending off reporters and photographers and video journalists out into live terror events in London where you don't really know what's happening, and they're taking a lot of risk themselves. You're responsible for what they're doing, but they're going out because they believe in what they're doing and they want to go and tell the stories. But that's a lot of responsibility for everybody involved. So I think I'll never forget those days. And then, of course, the death of the Queen is one of those things that anybody in the newsroom will know, that you plan for something like that for, I would say, decades. It goes on for years and years and years, the planning for events like that. Not probably most particularly for somewhere like PA, because the Press Association sits right at the heart of the UK media, and the media knows that when the Queen dies, PA will be the first to know, and they will then provide an extraordinary range of content immediately. And so you have to have all that content ready. You build that up over years. You also build up an absolute minute-by-minute plan for what will happen after it is announced, and you need all of that to work like clockwork. So if any of that doesn't work, you're in real trouble, to put it mildly. So those few days, I don't think anybody will ever forget. We'd gone up to Balmoral to see the Queen, where she was meeting Liz Truss as the new Prime Minister, and while we were waiting for the Prime Minister to arrive, we took some pictures of the Queen by an open fire at Balmoral, and they were to be the last pictures ever to be taken publicly of the Queen. So we had those, and then within a couple of days, another one of those mornings where you hear that there's some rumours that something might be happening, but you're not sure. You hear from your royal correspondent that a couple of events have been called off unexpectedly, and they don't know why. So then you start to make some more calls to find out what's happening. It's not clear, but then you see a message being given to the Prime Minister in the Commons, and she leaves the Commons. So then you begin to wonder. Then you're sort of hearing more from sources that actually it might be happening. Then you hear that members of the royal family are heading to Balmoral. So then you deploy as many reporters and photographers as you can find to get to Scotland. Then you're trying to book accommodation for them as quickly as you can, and then you're trying to get more of a steer on, well, what actually is happening. And then you start to hear from some sources abroad that things are happening in Australia where the Governor General appears to be preparing to say something. You hear various other things about shutting down of satellite signals to open up the airwaves, and so you start to build up a picture where you think, actually, this actually is the day. This is the day that we've been preparing for decades, and it's going to happen today. And then you're waiting for more insight from the palace on what they might say when, and then you kind of know it's going to happen within the next 2 or 3 minutes. And then at 6:30 that day, we pressed the button on the thing that announced to the world that the Queen had died. And then at that point, we must have published, within the next hour, we must have published at least 200 separate features, look backs, picture galleries, video, obituaries, with everybody in the newsroom. I mean, and you know, the buzz that day of just making all of that work well, and knowing what we were delivering was going to every newspaper, every broadcaster, not just in the UK, but all around the world, was an amazing feeling. I mean, obviously a desperately sad day, but in terms of a professional operation, I don't think there's much to match that. And almost as soon as we'd sent the news out, one of my senior team, who'd been in charge of all of the planning for what happens after the announcement, presented me with a book that was probably about 60, 70 pages long. And he said, there's only 2 of these books in the world. I've got one, and now you've got one. And it was basically a line by line account of everything that would happen hour by hour from that moment till the hour of the funeral service in Windsor. And the level of planning that had gone into saying, well, okay, so we know that the coffin, because it's happened in Balmoral, here's the street plan, here's where all the photographers are going to be on these different days, here's the plan for the flight, here's where all the photographers will be, here's where the video journalists will be, here's where the reporters are going to be. The most extraordinary body of work that, as I say, took years and years and years. And, you know, to be there on the day and then the days that followed, to see all that unfold is something that I'll never forget. Well, yeah, the lessons. I mean, I look back at that and I think there's a lot of things when you look back over your career. You know, if I'm talking about how you progress through a career, there's an awful lot of lessons, and I think, you know, mine are, you know, you can overcome great fears. I mean, I would have said when I was at school, the idea of talking in front of people would have absolutely terrified me. But I think sometimes you have to take on those fears and meet them head on, come up with ways that you can sort of get it right in your head to take them on, and then prove that you can do it, and then get better over time at how you do it. So I think, you know, there are things that you may fear doing, and the best thing to do is to meet them head on, and take them on and beat them. And I think I've done that a few times. I think there's a lot about who you know. So I mean, all of the work experience I tried to hoover up while I was in Northampton helped me get the job in the end at the Chronicle and Echo, because of, you know, I got to know some people. But the most interesting story about that is that my dad was a gardener, and I'd been trying to get work experience at the Chronicle and Echo for some months, and I'd had no success. And I'd got little stories in the paper, I'd written to the editor a few times, I'd spoken to some of the reporters, hadn't had any joy. And I was lamenting this to my dad one evening while we were having tea, and he said, oh, do you know I mow the lawn of the managing director at the Chronicle and Echo? I said, well, you know, I wish you told me before. He said, well, I do. He said, the next time I mow his lawn, I'll mention that you're interested in work experience. So the next time he mowed his lawn, he mentioned it, and the next day the editor rang me up and offered me some work experience. So that was a very good early example, I think, of, well, a lucky break, but also who you know. You know, it happened to be my dad, who knew somebody who was helpful. But then when I look through, in future moves through my career, the more that you do different jobs, the more you try different experiences, you start to build up, people that and sometimes the jobs that you hear about won't be the ones that are advertised. It will be, in the case when I found a job at the sports agency in London, it was because I'd met up with various reporters in London and got to know them. And one of them said to me, "Well, I know you told me you're interested in getting into sports journalism. There's this job," and it hadn't been advertised, but he'd heard that they were struggling to find somebody. Somebody dropped out, and I went and I got the job. I wouldn't have got that if I'd have still been in Northampton. So building up that kind of range of experience, sometimes taking jobs that don't feel like they're a great big leap forward, but they're just a different job, will sometimes prove to be the ones that get you the in. That move to CFAX back in my earliest days, I mean, it was a pretty grim job, but it opened up my eyes to other opportunities once I was in London. So I would definitely say that's a lesson. You get plenty of pushbacks. I've written countless letters applying for jobs and didn't hear back. There'll be people who don't believe in you. When I first joined the BBC the second time, my manager said to me, "Did you go to Oxbridge?" I said, "Well, no, I didn't. I didn't go to university." And he said, "Well, I don't think." He said, "Really, at the BBC, you only really succeed as a manager if you've been to Oxbridge." And I was determined to prove him wrong, and I did, and I outlasted him at the BBC. And I think I proved him wrong just by sheer hard work. And that'll be one of my other messages: always be the person who's prepared to work the hardest. Be the one who'll put their hand up to do the work, whether it's work that means you're not going to be able to do something that evening, or work at the weekend. I know people's downtime is very precious, but sometimes being the person who's prepared to do the job that nobody else wants to do, it might not be the glamorous job that day, but being the one who's known to be the one who will do it and will go out of their way to make something happen, will often be the way. And I can easily, I can sit in a newsroom for 10 minutes and you can soon spot the people who are there to do the job that they've just come in to do. And there are those who are looking up and they're looking out for the next job. They're coming up to ask, "Well, what can I do now? I've done that. Where's the next thing?" So I think just that dogged determination to be the best and to work the hardest. That's actually one of my biggest breaks, actually, was when I was working at the sports agency, an agency called Excel. I was only a relatively down-table sub at Excel, and the Press Association bought Excel. So there was a coming together of these two agencies who'd never been particularly friendly in the past. So that was interesting. But on a particular Saturday, the sports editor at the Press Association came to watch Excel in action, and he just sat in the newsroom and watched us working. And I didn't think much of that, other than I was just going to do what I normally do, and I'll work as hard as I can, and I'll go the extra mile, all that stuff. And on the Monday he rang me up and he said, "Look, this is really controversial, but I need a chief sub-editor to run the new joined up PA and Excel sports desk. And I watched you on Saturday and you never stopped. You were into everything. You were doing your best at all times. You didn't stop. And I'd like you to be the chief sub." And so I jumped over loads of people, many of whom weren't that delighted, I imagine. But I did that, and I wasn't even thinking about it. And it was only about an attitude to work, I think. So, that might sound pretty obvious, but I think that always focusing on doing the job to the best of your ability has stood me in good stead down the years. And you combine that with one or two of the other things, the lucky breaks, the people that those things all kind of add up in the end, I think. And then my only other advice is, whenever I end up talking to people who are just starting out, prepare for interviews. I must have done thousands of interviews by now, and whether it's very junior people or very senior people, they often make the same mistakes, and it's all about lack of preparation, not knowing enough about the company that they're applying to, not knowing enough about the news of the day. Some really basic things that you think, well, that can't happen, but it happens all the time. And so I would say just there's probably 3 or 4 things that you should always do if you're actually formally applying for a job and then going for an interview, because if you fail any one of them, my interest in the interview always ended pretty much at that point. And it's amazing, even to this day, how ill prepared people can sometimes be. So yeah, I guess those are some of the things I've learnt along the way. Well, I mean, I hope first of all that people have some fun. I like to make people laugh through all the difficult and hard things that have gone on down those 43 years. There's been an awful lot of funny things have happened. So I like to tell people some of those funny stories, whether it's times from the local newspapers and the unbelievable people who'd come into the front office that you'd have to go and interview. I had a man came in one day who said he could defy gravity. So I heard the news desk shout, "Clifton, go down to the front office. There's a man who can defy gravity," because he couldn't, but it made for a great story. He'd built a contraption with a pram that he said could defy gravity. It couldn't, but it made the front page of the paper. But those things happen all the time, and all the way through my journalistic career, there's been an enormous amount of fun. So I always want people to think that job is fun. He's had a decent career, but he's had a lot of fun along the way, and he's told me 2 or 3 things that I will remember as really funny stories. I always want that to be the case. But in doing that and imparting that and having a bit of fun, I can kind of impart some insight about what I've learned about how newsrooms have changed, the different techniques now that are required around doing journalism well. So, for the right kind of audience, there's an awful lot to talk about that. How you run those digital teams now, how you lead good teams in these rapidly changing times is something I've obviously had to do an awful lot of. And then there's a lot I've learned, and I hope I've talked a bit about it in just what I've learned about what you can do to advance your career. What have I learned from my many years doing this? I think I've learned a lot, and when I look back now, it's a nice position to be in, to kind of trace that journey that I've had, and to see what made the difference. These different points to get you to a place where you're doing all right at the end of it. And at a point that I couldn't have imagined when I first started writing to the Chronicle and Echo looking for work experience, that one day I could be running PA. But it's possible. If I can do it, anybody can do it. But I think there's some lessons along the way that I've learned that I'd like to impart to people. So you put all those things together, I hope there are talks that I give to people that will entertain them, it'll give them a laugh, but also give them a bit of insight into the media landscape of today and newsrooms of today, how they've changed, but also, how I've sort of ploughed a furrow through these 43 years.